Hey, it's Chris Mitchell. After 10 years with no dog, we got Walter. I bring him to work with me a couple days a week, but on the days when he's not here, he goes to Ridgeside Canine for puppy daycare. Walter absolutely loves it there, and I know he's in great hands. Clean, spacious, happy. We even see pictures on Facebook of what he's up to. I love that you can have him train your dog while your dog's with him. I can't recommend them enough. Ridgeside Canine Training Facility and Aquatic Center on Gateway Drive in Winchester. That's RidgesideCanineWinchester.com.
Game over, man. Game over.
You're gonna need a bigger boat. Why so serious?
I am Iron Man.
This is a tasty burger.
Welcome to the InSession Film Podcast.
Welcome to this podcast review from May 3rd, 2023. And are you there, Brendan? It's me, JD Duran.
I'm here, JD. I'm here. Can you see me? Can you hear me?
I can see you. Yes. Yes. Thanks for joining us, everybody, for this review. I'm very excited to dive into this. Brendan, are you familiar with the famous Judy Blume novel?
Oh, of this novel? Yes, I am familiar with it. It's actually one I've never read. I'm trying to recall my history with Judy Blume because this is obviously a name that we kind of grew up with. I feel like she was always all over our like elementary school libraries. And I remember reading stuff like Tales of a Fourth Grade Nothing, for instance, which was part of the Fudge series, I think. But I never read Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret.
Yeah, that's one I haven't read either. I don't recall if it was something that was assigned in an English class or something. I don't know. I don't really remember. And, you know, when watching the film, nothing rang a bell in that regard. I mean, I was familiar with the book, familiar with the general idea of this story and what it was about, but I've never really read it. So this was kind of my first foray into it in a significant way.
It's pretty I think it's pretty known and well publicized that it was a huge hit among young women. And we'll certainly talk about that given the nature. I saw the film literally just a few moments ago. I just got back from the theater. Maybe
you did
20 minutes ago. So I'm pretty fresh on this one, but I went with my fiance Maris and she has read the book. It was one of her favorites and it was very educational for her at the time that she read it. And she was like Leonardo DiCaprio in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, just pointing at the screen constantly, which was amazing. And I think that just goes to show how, from at least that reaction that she was giving off, that the film apparently is very faithful to its source material.
Well, that is good to hear. And that's one of the reasons I wanted to ask, because I wasn't sure. And while I did see this a few days ago, I haven't had an opportunity yet to really look into that, to read a ton of other reviews. Hopefully after we get done recording this, I'll have that opportunity. Or if anyone listening to this, if you can speak to that, I'd be curious to know if this does match the source material, what changes there may be. And I actually have some thoughts on that, or at least some questions based off of the screenplay, which we can talk about as we get into this. Obviously, we're here to talk about Kelly Fremon Craig's new film, Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret, directed by Craig, written by Kelly Fremon Craig as well. This stars Rachel McAdams, Abby Ryder-Fortson, Ellie Graham, Benny Safdie, Kathy Bates is in the film as well. It's interesting because this is where we get to the premise, and I feel like if you're listening to this, you probably have read the book or at least have seen this.
Yeah,
it's weird because this is a popular novel. It's one that. Again, even if you're like us and you haven't read it, you kind of know what you're getting into. But just in case, when her family moves from the city to the suburbs, 11-year-old Margaret, I don't know what gave that away, but the central character, her name is Margaret.
Oh, that would have been so fun if it was one of those cases where the title is nowhere in the movie.
Completely switches. 11-year-old Susan has to
11-year-old Bob.
Yeah. She has to navigate new friends, feelings in the beginning of adolescence. So yes, in many ways, this is a coming of age story, which is something Brennan and I really love when it comes to film. This film is also a lot about faith, and that's something that we've talked quite a lot about over the years as well. So let's dive into this. Actually, before we do, quickly, Brendan, Kelly Fremon Craig. How do you feel about her? We talked about The Age of 17, I believe, when that came out. Was that 2017?
That was
when that came out?
I think it was around that time. And honestly, just given my reaction to this movie, I want to go back and rewatch The Age of 17 again because we both really liked it at the time. But I'm starting to think we may have slightly underrated it still by saying it was great.
Maybe, because I was pretty high on it.
But now looking at what Kelly Fremon Craig is able to capture from not just an adolescent standpoint, but from a female adolescent standpoint, and how not just charming, but how sincere and honest and welcoming that it is, and also kind of challenging as well. Her movies between these two are not really ones that give you all of the answers. You know, there are some things that are left dangling a little bit, some questions that you might feel a little put off by. I admire that, and I think this one does that even further. So it makes me want to go back and revisit The Age of 17 to see if there are more those nuances there.
I agree. And one other film that I want to note, because I recently revisited this film, she was one of the writers on the Transformers Bumblebee movie in 2018, which I maintain is the best, by far the best Transformers, live action Transformers film we've had to date.
I mean, it's not much competition there, JD.
Not much competition. True. I guess that's not much of a hot take, but
it's more of a hot take to say it's actually a very good movie.
It is genuinely a very good movie, even when you take out the Transformers-y aspects of it. And I think all of that is fine, but that is a really good movie about a young woman attempting to grieve and attempting to cope and ciphering that through, of course, daughterhood, but her own womanhood in a way as well.
Yeah.
And adolescence, because she's in high school at the time. So that's certainly a part of it as well. And it's, it's easy to get caught up in the Transformers blockbuster action part of it, or Travis Knight's direction, which is much better than Michael Bay's.
Yeah.
But the writing by Kelly Fremon Craig is really the heart and soul, as well as the central performance, which is fantastic.
It makes
really
it makes me wonder how much Kelly Fremon Craig was actually involved in the initial writing of Bumblebee, because from what I understand and what I'm looking up here on IMDb as we're talking here, she did mostly script revisions. In some ways, she was probably a script doctor of sorts for the movie, which is sometimes the best thing you can actually have for one of your movies. Maybe it was more of a basic Transformers movie of sorts until Craig sort of reinterpreted it in a human way and added a different. I don't know. We're just hypothesizing.
I don't know.
Like she carries those sensibilities for sure.
Yeah, because Christina Hodson also had her hands on the screenplay as well, and I don't know, admittedly, as much about her work as Kelly Fremon Craig. But it wouldn't surprise me if, again, that heart and soul that is in that film that Haley Steinfeld does such a great job of tapping into, if Fremon Craig had some heavy say in that for sure.
And she's worked with Steinfeld before, so maybe there was like a slight
of course,
sense of ghost directing going on there if she was ever
perhaps.
on set.
Perhaps.
I don't know. Maybe we're just giving Craig a lot of credit because of these films that she has directed, and maybe it's credit that is deserved. But I don't know. That might be it.
At any rate, I saw that on her resume, and and again, as I saw it once again just a few weeks ago, I was like, this makes a lot of sense. I definitely see Kelly Fremon Craig weirdly in that movie, given the arc of Steinfeld's character there. Yeah. Anyway, that's a lot of preamble. Let's get into Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret. What did you think about this one, Brendan?
Oh, it's great. I think it's great. I think it might be the best movie of the year so far, but I haven't seen I haven't seen much from this year yet to really make that bold of a statement for it to carry that much weight. But from what I have seen, this is my favorite film of the year so far. I wouldn't be surprised if it ends up in my top 20 by the end of the year. I'm actually surprised that we haven't seen many other adaptations of Judy Blume's work, but I wouldn't be surprised if this kind of kickstarts that. Like I said, I was mostly familiar with some of her work that related to the Fudge series, like Tales of a Fourth Grade Nothing, but I haven't read Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret. But from what my fiance was telling me is that it was sort of it sort of was the manual for them when it came to growing up in a scientific way, I'll say.
Makes sense, yeah.
And I do appreciate that this film is willing to, for lack of a better phrase, go there. And I think it handles it very well. It's very delicate. It's honest. It's educational without trying to be educational, if that makes sense. It's not. I mean, the movie's not an informative movie in the way that like the characters in the movie experience at this assembly, right? You know, it's not like that.
Yeah.
It's not an infomercial.
Sure. Yeah.
But it is willing to challenge you about what you dealt with in your youth, and do so in a way that I think is really quite provocative and beautiful. It kind of carries this facade of like a 90s coming of age movie of sorts. I was very much getting like
Sure.
Nancy Meyers vibes for some of it, and that's really mostly the first half until it just isn't that by the time you get to the second half. And we'll talk a lot about how the film does a really interesting job, not just, you know, tackling young womanhood, but really religion. I mean, religion is very much a plot synopsis here in some ways. And
Yep.
I like the way it tackles it. We'll talk about it further, but I appreciated how challenging that it was. This is a very sweet movie.
I'm with you. I really like this film quite a lot. It's one of my favorites of the year as well. It's really funny, as you denoted there. It's wonderfully awkward at times. It certainly doesn't shy away from adolescent embarrassment, but it doesn't forego sincerity either. When these characters feel overwhelmed and emotional, the film takes that seriously and gives those scenes some earnestness. And, you know, we somewhat alluded to it in our preamble, but I love the writing here and how it manages to blur not just that tonal dichotomy, but faith and how Margaret's journey of understanding faith further murkies the water for her. That's obviously foundational to this story, and I think the film does a great job of demonstrating Margaret's curiosity and ultimately her apathy. I found it quite compelling how she tests the waters, so to speak, with all these various sects of faith. She's an open-minded blank canvas and is almost eager to hear from God. But in the end, that's what makes this narrative so timeless, as the destruction caused by religion is a tale as old as time. And it's, of course, at the root of this film's tension and how everything crystallizes in those final scenes. Perhaps the writing here, and again, I'll be curious to kind of walk through this a little bit more, and perhaps this is something that just will evolve once I hear from others that have actually read the novel as well. But I do wonder if the film is somewhat, ever so subtly, a victim of this being an adaptation, as it's trying to cover as much ground as it can from the novel. And as a result, some threads here feel perhaps maybe a little thin, but I think the film is so endearing and so charming, and these performances are incredible. They're really great. I love this entire cast.
Yep, agreed.
That on the whole, that's not much of an issue, but I could see that being a talking point of, this was explored more in the novel, or this thing over here had, you know, more of an impact on Margaret's life. It did feel like the film brought up a lot of things, and some of them impacted her heavily, and others it was small.
Yeah.
And maybe that's in the novel or not. That's why it's more of a question than it is a criticism at this point, but something that came to mind. Overall, though, wholeheartedly with you. This is really great. and quite easily one of my favorite films of the year so far.
Yeah, I haven't read the novel, as I've mentioned, but I will at least speak to some of those threads that you're talking about, because I did talk to my fiance about that when we were on our way home, and she has read the book, so she was able to speak to some of those things. And weirdly, I brought it up as a question to her as well, because there are some threads that I don't know if I want to say they're thin, but they do feel slightly unresolved in a way. Like there are certain things that are left dangling a bit.
Yeah, and yeah, that's how I felt. Yeah,
but that's something again, it's all a matter of taste and how we feel the movie is operating as a whole. But that's actually one of my favorite things about the film is that there is actually some unresolved conflict between not just Margaret's friends. There's actually one friend that she has a very close relationship with that just kind of dissipates.
Yeah. But that's never really addressed after what is a significant moment between the two.
Yeah, and I like that. I actually like that there is this lingering tension that remains as is, because I don't know if this is the case for you. I've had moments like that with some of my friends from my childhood that it ended up being maybe the pivotal moment that caused us to drift apart for the rest of our lives. Yeah. And I'm not saying that that's what's going to happen between Margaret and this particular friend that we're talking about, but there is a very pivotal moment of contention between the two in a bathroom, a public bathroom, I'll simply say.
Yes.
And I do think that does a good job mirroring the drama of young womanhood. You know, like that there is like this competitive angle between them that sometimes maintains even longer than the actual friendship ever will. So I kind of like that there are some unresolved things, or even with regard to her family, there's a sense of hope when you bring all of these people together, and then it just kind of ends and it remains kind of, tragic. And I kind of like that it, I like that it was left a little dangling like that. Maybe the movie could have been a bit stretched in how it explored that. And maybe that's to your point, but I did like that some things were left unanswered for us. I appreciated that.
Yeah. I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing. Perhaps it would have enrich the film a little bit further. Maybe. But at times it does offer some great ambiguity. And also, I do understand that this is a film that is tackling various aspects of Margaret's adolescence, this specific time of her life. And it's not just the religion aspect of it, but her friends, she's moved to a new town. She doesn't know anybody. So she doesn't really know these people. She's getting to learn about them, the dynamic of, the various cliques within the school system in her class.
Yeah.
Like all of that is unfolding in front of her in real time. And then there's everything about her body and the changes there. And the film is blisteringly hilarious when it's emphasizing
it's really
that in Margaret. So it is navigating a lot. And I understand you're not going to be able to explore everything as thoroughly as you want, which is, again, at this point, maybe more of a talking point, a question than it is a criticism. But I do think perhaps some things could have been fleshed out perhaps a little bit more. But circling back to Kelly Fremon Craig and how she's able to perhaps mitigate what criticisms could be there, because you mentioned the Nancy character, who is the first friend that she meets when they first move to New Jersey.
Yeah.
And how there is this pivotal moment between the two where their friendship starts to dissolve slightly. And while it is not addressed directly per se, I do love this incredible subtlety that Kelly Fremon Craig shows us, mostly from a directional standpoint, in those final scenes where Margaret makes a choice that is a little bit of redemption on her end, because earlier in the film she had made this mistake and misjudged someone based off of this clique perspective, and how she was caught in those traps. So she makes a choice to befriend someone outside of her clique. It's this endearing little moment. In fact, another one of her group joins her in that moment.
Yep.
And as the camera cuts to the dance floor, Kelly Fremon Craig then cuts back to the remaining two friends that do not join them on the dance floor. And you get a little bit of insight into what they're seeing, what they're perhaps feeling there. And so while the film doesn't address this unspoken tension between the two, it does it in this sense. Yeah, you sense it. It does address it in this indirect way that I do kind of love. So even though from a writing standpoint, you're not, maybe you can't fully flesh out everything, but I think little tidbits like that, little tricks with the camera, you know, these little moments where Kelly Fremon Craig is still able to make something out of it to where it's not nothing. There is a little something there to kind of help heighten it. And I love what she's able to do in that regard.
And that's the moment right there that sort of cued me in on the deliberate nature of that unresolved conflict, right?
Yes.
That it does seem very intentional. And I think on top of that too, just how it functions as a performative piece. I think these performances are all able to fill in what necessary gaps need to be there. So that it doesn't feel like bad storytelling as opposed to unresolved conflict, right? And you mentioned the performances already, just in a general sense, but the character of Nancy, Margaret's first friend, it's Elle Graham, I believe, is the young actress's name who plays her. Might be my favorite performance in the movie.
She's good. She's real good.
And again, I don't know if this is Kelly Fremon Craig, the writer, doing this, or if this is just the basis of Judy Blume's original book. But when Nancy's introduced, you don't really know what to make of this young character. Like, is she gonna be the bully? Is she gonna be the bad friend? Or is she just kind of like cockily endearing? Like, she kind of straddles this line. And I'm kind of tempted to think that it's the performance more than anything else, which again, you know, could also be on Kelly Fremon Craig, the director, in being able to convey that and channel that out of this young actress. But there is a lot of like tension from an audience perspective, not knowing which direction it's going to go. And it kind of left me on the edge of my seat, which I loved. And I think all the performances here kind of have different elements of that. But Elle Graham in particular, with regard to Nancy, I think is really great at sort of keeping you on your toes a little bit. And I think it's really cool.
Yeah, no, I think it's actually a really interesting supporting performance because she has this incredible confidence early on, which we come to find out that perhaps she's overcompensating for some insecurities that she's feeling.
Kind of a facade, yeah.
It's a little bit of a facade, but she has this confidence. She likes being the leader of their little secret club, and yet there, as the film unfolds, you do start to see that facade fall apart, and those vulnerabilities in Nancy, I do think there is credence to them. And she does such a great job of allowing like that moment in the bathroom to carry a genuine pathos. You can see that she is succumbing to that facade in that moment. And so perhaps the tension there, it certainly results in maybe a little bit of regret or I don't know how to approach this honesty with Margaret. Which again leads to that great ambiguity we see at the end of the film. But that does speak to certainly Craig's writing and direction, no doubt about it. But Elle Graham, I think, from a performance standpoint, does a great job of tapping into that as well. And then there's Rachel McAdams, who, for my money, gives the best performance here. I love this entire cast. Don't get me wrong.
I do too.
Love this entire cast.
At least I think this might be Rachel McAdams' best performance.
She is remarkable here. And again, I love that Kelly Fremon Craig takes time to emphasize these subtle moments in the Barbara character here, played by Rachel McAdams. You know, like a moment that comes to mind for me specifically, you know, because early on in the film, we see that, okay, we're moving to New Jersey, you know, sacrifices have to be made. As a result, she's not able to indulge in her passion. I'm going to join all of these clubs, you know, at school so I can feel like I'm part of Margaret's life in some way. And again, just as a little bit of an aside on that, that's also one of those things from a writing standpoint where, like, I don't know if this was necessary because it doesn't really lead to anything. like from a plotting, like grand perspective, it's just like, because she says she does it because she wants to be involved in Margaret's life. But those two things never collide here. Like
They
there's
don't.
never like,
I think that's
there's
kind
never
of the
like
point. It's more of her. It's Barbara giving herself this excuse to keep herself busy now.
Yes, and that's it. Yeah,
Yeah.
And that's why I wanted to circle back to a scene later on, because it gives her something to do, and in the end, it's really not about those things, because then it becomes about her having a realization of how futile those things are, that they're not satisfying in any sort of great degree. And there's also a facade to it as well. Like she sees, Mrs. Wheeler and these other moms, just pawning things off on her, and there's no sort of uniformity to it. And then that tethers to this great moment where she sees this bird outside this window. Yeah. And she becomes so inspired in the moment. And so she gets her paintbrush, begins to draw a little bit. And then seconds later, the doorbell rings, and it's, here, I'm pawning more things onto you, like these tedious things that she doesn't care about. And from a thematic perspective, I think that's great. But Rachel McAdams' performance there, and how she's able to tiptoe that line of inspiration, creativity, being full of life for once after this big move, to just being drowned out by this tedious mundanity, all within the same span of like 10 seconds. It's pretty incredible.
It's not even just those emotional extremes you're talking about. Rachel McAdams is also really funny in the movie.
She's really funny. Yeah.
And a lot of that is also, once again, credit to Craig, the writer, and maybe even Judy Blume, the original writer. Some of these jokes were originally in the novel, but you talked about how futile these PTA escapades are that Barbara decides to indulge herself and to keep herself busy. The way all of that crystallizes, the final scene between her and Nancy's mother, I'll simply say there's one line of dialogue that is one of the funniest things.
It's great.
It's not even Barbara's answer to that, which is honestly the funniest thing. But Kelly Fremon Craig has a very specific line that shows us how futile all of this is. And it's actually uttered by Nancy's mother, in which she says, "Who would have thought all these stars could be a fire hazard?" It's directly saying,
exactly.
Yeah, Barbara, you wasted your time on this, didn't you?
And she did all the work.
She did all the work. But again, Rachel McAdams, she has to straddle a lot simultaneously, like you're saying. And it's even way early on when the whole move to New Jersey is introduced, and she says, "This is what I want to do. I want to spend time with you, Margaret."
Yes.
You could sense both a facade and honesty at the same time, because she does want to spend time with her daughter, but she also still wants to be an artist and an art teacher, and she knows that she's giving something up while still gaining something else in return. There is a balance there, and I think that's really well done.
That's a moment that I also wanted to bring up, taking the words right out of my mouth. An incredible close-up shot of Rachel McAdams where she utters a line of dialogue that would give her daughter a little bit of comfort, given that this is a surprise to Margaret, that we're moving. It's a big change. I'm going to be in this with you. But yes, in those eyes, you sense the pain and sacrifice that she's having to make, that this is not something that she is fully on board with, even though she is. Yeah. And that comes through palpably in McAdams' performance. And I also think about that moment, speaking of the humor and a lot of what this film is examining here, that moment at the end of the film with Margaret in the bathroom, where she walks in and Margaret finally experiences this big moment that she's been anticipating. And she walks in, and there's like this moment of happiness, this epiphany that her daughter is becoming a woman. And it's very funny.
Unscripted. I love that.
It did. Yeah. It felt so raw and genuine. Like she didn't know what she was walking into in that moment, because she starts crying and she's like, "I don't even know why I'm crying." It's so good. I mean, how McAdams taps into that, how Craig got that out of McAdams, whatever creative process was there to get that, it was impeccable.
Oh yeah,
It was so good.
And of course, let's not forget Abby Ryder Fortson as Margaret herself.
She's great too.
She was she was young Cassie in what, the first 2 Ant-Man movies, if I'm not mistaken.
I believe so. Yes.
Yeah,
I think that's right.
I want to look that up now because I'm genuinely curious, because I know that she did play a part in the Ant-Man and the Wasp. She played Cassie there, so I knew she looked familiar. But yeah, this is certainly a revelation for her as well, because that final scene there, it does seem like Craig just said, "Okay, we're filming this scene. Oh, this is what's happening. You don't have any writing. Action." And it's
it's like she told Fortson, this is what's happening with Margaret.
Yeah.
So, as it happens, call for your mother. And then from there, we'll just see what happens. And then McAdams didn't know what she was walking into. She just knew that her cue was to walk into the bathroom.
Yeah.
And so did you capture like this raw honesty? I mean, that's what it felt like. I don't know if that's what it was. And if that's not how it was, certainly huge credit to both of them as
for sure,
as actresses. I mean, and they're great enough they could pull that off anyway. But
and I like how
it did feel real like that.
And I like how that moment is treated symbolically. Just how it overarcs the entire movie. I hate to make this comparison because I feel like others are going to, and of course it's a very direct comparison, so I don't want to make it sound like it's myopic, but it's similar to how a movie like Turning Red treated its own subject matter in a symbolic way that had some maybe similar things. But of course, this movie is being a bit more scientific about it, and certainly doing so with a lot more grace. It's certainly more eloquent in the way it's presenting that, but I do like how that final moment is not just something that happens. It's this overarching thing that there's a buildup to it, needs to go through in order to come to some type of realization, and I like that it's used in multiple ways other than just one. Yeah, absolutely. And then circling back to what we said at the beginning of this, the film leans into the awkward tension of what that moment is like as an adolescent, and the embarrassment that you feel, or the uncertainty that you feel when your body is going through those changes. Right. This film heavily leans into that in a great way. And I'm not always the biggest fan of awkward humor, because most of the time it's just awkward and less humorous for me. Yeah. It's just subjectively not my thing. And I don't know what it is about Kelly Fremon Craig and how she captures it here, but to me, I loved it. I loved every second of it. I do think there's a point to it. Was great. Yeah, it actually means something other than other forms of awkward comedy. Yeah, it's not just a cheap tactic to get laughs, and maybe that's what it is, because a lot of awkward humor, they're doing it in this silly, goofy, maybe insipid way just for laughs, and that's all that it is. Where here there is incredible purpose to it all. Yeah. Well, this is something I love about Kelly Fremon Craig between this movie and The Edge of 17, is that the bare bones of both of these narratives aren't necessarily that much new, or they're not innovative or anything like that. I mean, for the first half of this movie, there are many scenes here that are pretty commonplace among young coming of age. There's a game of spin the bottle in this movie. We've seen that thousands of times. Yeah. And yet somehow it feels a little bit different. And I don't really know how to explain it, but there's a different sense to it. And I don't know if it's a perspective thing, if it's a filmmaking thing, or maybe just a source material thing. I'm not really sure, but there's a difference to it, which I have to give Craig a lot of credit for. Yeah, and that's an interesting moment. Perhaps in certain moments of that sequence, it borderlines on that awkwardness that makes me recoil. I still loved it. But on the whole, I did as well. That awkwardness doesn't bother me as much as it bothers you. Fair enough. Yeah. On the whole, though, it didn't, keep me from engaging with the sequence. And I think it ends in an incredible way, right? Where she gets this big moment that's unexpected, and perhaps that plants the seeds for that divisiveness we were talking about earlier between Margaret and Nancy. And but because it's also interesting how she reacts to the aftermath of it too, where she completely embellishes the moment as an adolescent would do in that moment. So could have led to further conflict, and it doesn't, which again, I love movies that avoid traditional conflict, I'll say. And I think this one does. If there is conflict there,
it is unspoken,
Exactly.
as is
Yeah.
lots of the conflict between, those two characters specifically.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I guess we should talk about the religiosity of this film.
Let's talk about God.
Let's talk about God. Are you there, God?
Hopefully we do you proud when it comes to this dissection here.
I know. Well, first of all, let me ask you about this, because you, at least among our circles, famously are not a fan of voiceover narration. Given that you ended up loving this film,
Yeah.
I imagine that it did work for you here.
Oh, absolutely. Well, that's something that kids do a lot, right? Is that they tend to speak. They tend to speak like the way Margaret does internally, right? You find yourself questioning a lot of things, and many children they'll direct those questions to someone or something that they're not talking to. I mean, the way that Margaret speaks to God here is not that different than the way sometimes children would talk to their own toys in some ways. I mean, it certainly has more of a meaning because she's very openly trying to understand what religion is, because one of the plot elements here is that Margaret was raised away from religion. Her dad is Jewish. Her mom was raised as a very devout Christian. And as such, that has led to conflict between her parents being Rachel McAdams' parents. So Margaret's
And Benny
grandparents.
Safdie, who we haven't even mentioned yet.
Benny Safdie's in this movie.
Crazy.
Whose mother is
That
played by
kid.
Kathy Bates and is a very devout Jew. So there's two lines of religion feeding into Margaret, right? You got Judaism from her dad's side and Christianity from her mom's side, and they very much want her to be away from that, so that way when she grows up and learns to understand this, she can make a choice herself as far as what religion she wants to follow, if any, which is an admirable thing to imbue on your children, right? To give them the choice. And I love that Margaret is choosing to learn about it early, in a way that's almost too early for some parents. And she's willing to go to temple, go to the temple for a Judaism ceremony. She also goes to a Catholic confession. She goes to all of these different subsets, these different sects, and the movie doesn't really condemn nor really condone any of them. It's just
she's a blank canvas, as I noted in my opening thoughts, and I do love that. I love that she's willing to go to temple. She tries out, she doesn't full on go to like a Catholic mass or anything, but she walks into the church and walks into the confession booth. I'm not sure what to call it. Forgive me, I'm not Catholic. She goes to. I also think it's interesting, too, that she doesn't just go to a Christian church. I think we should note specifically she goes to a black church.
Yeah.
And I think we all know there is a huge distinction between what that energy is like and what a conventional white church is like. It is not the same thing. So it's funny to me that she ends up there instead of at maybe a church that her mom would go to, for example.
Yeah.
But it speaks to, again, broadly speaking, that she is an open book when it comes to God and faith. She wants to experience it all and make a decision on her own.
Yeah. And in many ways, I feel like that's her parents making the right choice for her. And she's now choosing to open up to that. Like this is now the time that she's choosing to take some ownership in that and teach herself some of these things. And what the movie teaches us, or I should say what this adventure teaches Margaret, is sort of something that you alluded to in your opening thoughts that I think is very provocative and very challenging. And it's one of my favorite lines in the entire movie is that I actually wrote it down here. I snuck out my phone while watching this movie, and I tried to do it in the dark. So forgive me for any moviegoers who hate people that bring out their phones, but I had to write down this note.
Look, Brendan is also a critic. And
I didn't have a notepad.
We were doing this immediately afterwards.
But at one point, Margaret's writing down her thoughts about religion, and this is after a very pivotal moment between not just her grandmother, played by Kathy Bates, but her grandparents on her mom's side that she's now meeting for the first time.
Yes.
And she says, "What I learned about religion is that it makes people fight." And it's such a great line. It's such a great line that there is this narrow-mindedness to religion. And I think it speaks to this beautiful notion that religion is not the same thing as spirituality sometimes. You can have a personal relationship with God in your own way and still feel fulfilled by that. And I think that's in many ways what this movie is getting at, because it doesn't take a side on a certain religion. It doesn't necessarily take a side on religion itself, but it does at least appreciate the notion of being spiritual in some way. And that's the way that you choose to go about that, which I think is a very mature answer.
I completely agree. I do love that moment. Certainly want to speak to it here in a second. I asked you about the voiceover and how effective it is here. The one other element to that I want to point out is that it's prayer. Like it's not just conventional voiceover. It is her talking to God. And that's how most people, let alone children, like when they talk to God, they're going to do that internally. They're not going to do that, verbally out loud. And if they are, you should maybe walk to the other side of the street. Just kidding.
Or hold their hand.
Or hold their hand. All joking aside, most people, when they indulge in prayer, they're doing that internally. And this is Margaret voicing her concerns, her challenges to God. And as I noted in my opening thought, she is eager to hear God. Like when she goes to, when she goes to the temple, she's like, I didn't hear you. I didn't feel you, but I wanted to. Yeah. When she goes to the Christian church, she says the same thing, or to confession. Like she is eager to find God, but she's not able to experience it. And then the thing that eventually crystallizes what becomes her apathy in the end are this incredible dichotomy of her grandparents, as you noted, her grandma on her dad's side is devout Jewish, and then on the other side, devout Christian. And what religion has taught us more than anything is that all they care about is power, and they'll do that at all costs.
Yeah, certainly organized religion definitely represents
organized religion, and that's what I'm speaking to, and that's what they represent, right? Yeah. Like, if it boiled it down to individuality, that'd be one thing. And you could certainly make the argument that on an individual level that it is about that faith. Like when you see Kathy Bates's character throughout the film, there isn't anything about the character that you would see and come to the conclusion that this person is awful. We don't want anything to do with her. No, she loves her granddaughter. She's very sincere. Like she's an endearing character, sometimes very funny because it's Kathy Bates, and she brings great humor to the character as well. Mm-hmm. Like she is a lovable, charming grandmother. So on an individual level, there's nothing to necessarily criticize about what faith means to her. But in that final battle, if you will, at the end of the film, it's not about individuality anymore. It's about this broader idea of bringing someone from the outside in.
Yeah, it becomes about conversion.
Like me. It becomes about conversion. And that's where destruction takes place. And as we all know, historically speaking, that's mostly what religion has done from a broad perspective, especially when we're talking about colonialism or conversion, power. It is all about, maintaining that and doing whatever it takes. Yeah. And that's created destruction and devastation throughout the decades and millennium. So that's, and we see that like in a vacuum here, like in a microcosm, and how that, affects Margaret on an emotional level on her own spiritual journey. It just completely removes her from God altogether. And so the film gets to have its cake and eat it too, in the sense that regarding Margaret's own journey here, it's very effective. The film builds to it in a seamless way. It's very moving, but metaphorically speaking, I think it also hits the nail on the head.
Oh, I agree.
And I think it's something that a lot of people can relate with.
I agree. I could see it putting some people off, but I think it's something that everyone needs to hear. And it's the movie is not condemning religion or church or faith, but it's also technically suggesting that you don't need those things to talk to God.
I do think it is condemning it in terms of
the
like
narrow-mindedness
abrasive
of how
conversion.
people, it's less about the religion itself, but more about the way that some people narrow-mindedly use it as a weapon, right?
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, which is again, broadly speaking, how religion has used itself over the years.
But still, like a lot of the ceremonies that Margaret chooses to attend, the many different sects here, like and some of them, even though she claims that she hasn't felt God's presence communicating with her, though a lot of those experiences aren't necessarily bad experiences, though.
No,
which is
in
what
fact,
I do
if anything, it's the opposite. Like Kelly Fremon Craig, and this is important, does a great job of breeding credence to those experiences. Like when she goes to temple, it's not a bad experience. She just gets to experience it. Same thing with the Christian church. Now, the Catholicism part of it is a little different because from a plotting perspective, she's not able to experience it in a pure way, but she's at least open to it and indulges in it slightly. But either way, the film is never condemning those various sects of religion on their own terms.
Yeah.
Again, on an individual level, the film is never condemning anything of that. And in fact, if anything, it's the opposite of like, hey, if you're open-minded and a blank canvas and you search this on your own, you might be able to find peace and healing.
Yeah. You might find togetherness, you might find community
weapon,
there, and that's perfectly fine. Yeah. And that's a hard thing to navigate with topics like this. Is that for any artist, for any storyteller, it could be very easy to inadvertently come off and say that these denominations, they're not good. They're not good. But I don't think Craig is really saying that. I don't think Judy Blume is really saying that. But I do think that there is this notion that we're talking about that it can easily be weaponized against people who are very close-minded.
And what does it lead to?
It leads to fighting.
It leads to fighting.
Yeah, especially among families.
And
what
Judy
else?
Blume
And what else? What else does that? Politics also does that. It's not too different. This movie is really relevant. It's really relevant.
And that's why I said in my opening thoughts, like this film, because it takes place in the 70s. You noted from a filmmaking style, it's like the 90s or the early 2000s.
It feels very modern, and I love that.
This is a very timeless story because, one, from an adolescent human perspective, we are all going to experience those changes when we're young. And especially women, they'll be able to relate with her on that level. But that idea of religiosity, from what I see about the world that we live in, Brendan, that is not going away anytime soon.
Probably not.
So that idea of religion and how it correlates to destruction or fighting, if I'm going to quote Margaret, I don't think that's going away either.
No,
so,
probably not.
This is a very timeless story in that regard.
It really is. And it's a great movie. It's a good movie, man. Movies are good.
It is.
Movies are really good.
It is. Man, movies are great. And it's funny because I've seen some TikToks over the last few months about how, movies are bad. They don't make good movies anymore. And I've stopped responding to those TikToks because all it does is stress me out. And it saddens me because the reality is there are still many great movies each year. Do you have to seek them out more than you had to previously? Maybe.
Yeah.
Maybe. And so we can certainly have that discussion. But there are good movies. There are many good movies.
Especially
and the
movies,
one thing,
movies like this that I think a lot of people are going to enjoy. It actually has a universality to it that I think is very open. It's very warm and welcoming. And I feel like this is one that if you choose to just skip out on this one because of the title, then I think that says more on you than it does on the movie.
I completely agree. And the other thing too that's very exciting is that this is in theaters. It did not go to streaming. And given the prominence of the novel, I'm not sure if this would have just been dumped on HBO Max or whatever streaming platform
I'm
anyway. But a movie like this, like, The Edge of 17, for example, that's, I don't think, based off of a famous novel like this one is. Would that have just gone straight to Hulu in the year of our Lord 2022? Maybe. I could see that being a reality. Yeah. But, I like it that movies like this are in theaters. Or I noted on social media, how I know things are really changing. Kelly Reichardt showing up is exclusively in theaters. It is not on any streaming platform yet.
That's just insane. That is just insane.
That would not have, last year, that would have found...
That would have been on Netflix right now or something.
That would be on Netflix right now. Absolutely. 2021 and of course 2020 and like First Cow, because of the pandemic, had to go to streaming.
Yeah.
So unfortunately, it never got a chance to see the theaters. And and showing up is probably less accessible than First Cow is.
Yeah, I haven't seen it yet, but I mean, First Cow has got a very it's a very cinematic movie. It's kind of one of those movies you want to see in a theater.
Yeah, and it unfortunately never got the opportunity.
Yeah,
and showing up, it's in, like, you have to go see that in theaters. And so to me, it's starting to feel more and more like what life for me was like in like 2017, 2018, 2019, where I had to like actively plan around, now with 2 children, going to the theater and making that work from a familial scheduling
Your wife is
standpoint.
so great just letting you go to these movies. She really is.
The moment she says no, and now that we have 2 kids, I don't know if that's on the table, but the moment she says no, that's when all of this ends for me. Now, it was a lot easier to do with just Sam.
Yeah.
Now, she would be home with 2 kids when I go to the theaters.
When Andrew starts getting older and you have to pay more attention to him. That might change things a little bit.
So we'll see, and it's this interesting thing because I understand that through the pandemic, maybe we got a little bit complacent, and from a parenting standpoint, it was very convenient for me to be able to, at a moment's notice, watch the showing ups of the world, the First Cows of the world, or maybe even the Are You There, God, It's Me, Margarets of the world, going straight to Prime Video or Netflix or whatever that we've had over the last 3 years. From a parent perspective, I'm able to watch more movies that way. It's very easy for me to schedule around family stuff that way. However, as a cinephile, I much prefer to watch these in theaters.
Yeah.
So it's a good problem for me to have when I have to hike 30 minutes down the road to go see Showing Up in a theater, because that's the only place that you can watch it right now. I kind of love having that
fact
problem.
that we have to go on an adventure to see the new Kelly Reichardt film now rather than just our
movies
couch.
are back, baby.
Yeah, that's how you know movies are back.
Like, I love that. Yeah. So
me too.
this is the next year or two could get really fun. So at any rate, any final thoughts on Are You There, God, It's Me, Margaret?
I just hope people see it. I really do. I'm just trying to think if there are any performances here we didn't get a
chance. Can we
to...
quickly talk about Benny Safdie?
Oh, he's really good in this. He's really good in this.
This kind of performance, I feel like, is not what we typically equate with Benny Safdie and his
especially
films
as
and
a
performances.
director. No, this is a very warm and compassionate and kind of goofy's not the right word, but he's a very optimistic father figure, and he's a sweetheart. He really is. Even when there are moments of conflict that do arise between he and his wife, played by Rachel McAdams, they kind of get resolved pretty quickly because of the tenderness that they have. And again, you don't really associate that type of behavior with the man who helped direct Uncut Gems, right? I mean,
exactly.
You just don't.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, or like his character in Good Time, like I feel like when I think of Benny Safdie, like I think of like those kind of characters or performances, especially think of his directorial work.
At least his performance in Licorice Pizza kind of made sense.
Yeah, no, that's a good point.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of straddled the line maybe a little bit between what we see here and what we know him for. There was kind of a middle ground there, I guess, but yeah, this is a very different kind of vibe that we haven't really seen from him, I guess. I guess
I just
wanted to hang out
say,
with him. I really did.
Seriously, yeah. He's really great, really endearing.
Help him
I
mow the
love
lawn.
that. the lawn gag throughout the film was really funny.
Yeah.
And I also loved, circling back to some of the awkward tension of the film, that moment when his mom shows up for dinner there at the very end before things blow up. Like his reaction there is hilarious. Like it is so good. It is so good.
Yeah,
So
that's great. That's great. Yeah, he's
just
really
really
good.
endearing
There's not a bad performance in this movie.
No.
Everyone
All
here
very
is great.
I guess my other last final thought, because you mentioned earlier, but we didn't have a chance to pause on it. But this circles back to our conversation on Rachel McAdams here.
Yeah.
Because there comes that moment where Margaret asks her about her parents. Because up until that point in the film, we didn't really know anything about them. And she's like, yeah, why haven't we ever seen them before? And then Rachel McAdams has to explain to her daughter for the first time why they've never visited them in Ohio, why they've never come to see them in New York. And it's a really touching and moving scene. And again, McAdams just slays in this film. It's just another example of the nuance.
It's such an interesting scene too, to have that placed like maybe a third of the way through the movie, because it almost felt like a potential final scene to some other story, which I kind of love. It introduces some type of tension between family members, and the one who you would think is most misunderstanding of that, the child perspective, kind of consoles the mother figure here, and I love that it kind of reverses roles a little bit. It's really tender and sweet.
I completely agree. Really do like it.
Yeah.
And then the last one, I'm trying to find the actor's name.
Well, as you're looking, I'll say one thing and shift gears just a little bit, but something I had no idea about this movie as I was sitting there during the end credits, and I'm not sure if you paid close attention to the end credits and who did what behind the camera, but do you know who the composer was for this movie?
Hans Zimmer.
I know.
How weird.
Hans Zimmer.
I noticed that earlier because, the Dune trailer came out. And of course, Zimmer and his, his part of that.
Yeah.
And so anyway, I got down a Zimmer rabbit hole and was looking some stuff up on his IMDb. And I did not know that. I did not make that connection at all. I just happened to see that when it came up on his IMDb page. I was like, I had no clue that he composed this film. Weird.
Yeah. But yeah, I thought that was weird. It's a good score. It's a really good score.
It is good. I will admit I was so charmed by the humor and the writing and the performances that I didn't pay too much attention to it. But now I am incredibly curious to go listen to this on Spotify whenever it drops.
Yeah.
I hope that it's up there now, because I might just do that later tonight. But that was fascinating. I guess my last final thought here, I can't find the actor's name, forgive me, but shout out to Teacher Guy. Really affable
was that,
character in this film too.
Echo Kellum, who played Mr. Benedict. Is that who you're thinking?
Yeah,
of?
is that who? Yeah,
yeah,
is that who it
the
is?
teacher played by Echo Kellum. I think that's who it is.
Small role, but I love the little influence he has here on the film.
Again, it could seem like an unresolved thread, or it could have resolved itself too quickly. But again, the performance is so tender and so sweet that you just kind of buy it, regardless of where it goes.
Yeah, and maybe it's just performance, and that's all that it is, because he's only in the film like 3 or 4 different times. But each time he's there, there's this tender quality that he brings to the conversations he has with Margaret. Yeah, it leaves a huge impression, and it certainly speaks to, again, in these very subtle ways, the importance of, that role in our kids' lives.
Yeah.
Which blows my mind that we don't pay those people like anything. It's kind of crazy.
Do you still remember your teachers from elementary school at all? Like their names and...
I do remember a few, yes.
Okay. I remember almost all of them. But then again, I also went to a much smaller school. I mean, my graduating class in high school was like 120.
That is small.
Yeah. I told you this. Yeah. It was very common for me to be late to school because I got stuck behind a horse and buggy on the way there.
Oh, yeah.
I made that joke many times, but that's where I grew up, in Berks County, Pennsylvania. But I still remember the names of all of my teachers. And they left that impression on me that I will never forget them.
and you're so impressionable at that age.
You are,
that, they do have an influence on you. So, and it's something I am seeing in Sam as well, like the teachers that he has and how he responds to them. It is important. Yeah. And so, again, that's not like a huge part of this movie, but I like how Kelly Fremon Craig incorporates that here.
I agree.
It's also a nice little touch. All right. I guess safe to say we both highly recommend this movie.
Absolutely.
Again, it is in theaters. So you have to go
to the
theater
movies.
to see it.
Go to the movies.
But it's good. Yes, it is good. Be sure to hit us up on social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. Let us know if you agree or disagree with any of our thoughts. Or if you're watching this on YouTube, leave a comment in the comment section below. And of course, you be sure to like and subscribe if you're watching this on YouTube, or if you're on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, you can leave us a review there as well. We greatly appreciate it. You can always email us your thoughts InSessionFilm@gmail.com as well. Be sure to go and listen to episode 532. It is now up. It was a riot of an episode.
Finally crossed 2 hours with the new format.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. We ranked Disney Animation's golden and silver ages, however you want to label it.
Yeah.
And it was great. There was a lot of fun to be had. There were some debates, and at one point, Jay even walked out and destroyed his backpack.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was his backpack, not a pillow. It was
his backpack.
You're right. Yeah.
Yeah, it was wild. So be sure to go and check that out. It was really great. And stay tuned for more this weekend, as we'll have Guardians of the Galaxy, and I think next week on the show, the guys are doing some sort of Marvel ranking. I think that's the plan.
Some type of updated ranking. Maybe not a full ranking because that'll just take too long, but maybe a Ryan and I are going to talk about it. It'll be Ryan and I holding down the fort there, but it'll be something related to the current status of how we feel about these Marvel movies and our overall ranking in comparison to that.
All right, be on the lookout for all of that. I'll see you all in a few weeks. Thanks for listening, watching, everybody. We will see you next time on the In-Session Film Podcast. Religion leads to fighting. That's what it does.
I'm never going to fight you.
Margaret was right.
I'm never going to fight you.